Welcome back to Tide Pod. Today is Friday, November 17th, and it's the Jack and Tony show. Got Brandon and Jordan out. Brandon's doing some more work for us at Tide Illustrated, so he could not hop on and talk about recruiting. And then Jordan informed me he's got two sick kids at home, so hope that's not too much of a hassle. It's always never a great day whenever that happens, but they'll be back on next week. But never fear, Tony and I are here to cover. And we had Tony. I mean, starting with football, we're gonna talk some hoops at the end too, but it was about as good of a game I think as you can get on Saturday with Alabama and Kentucky. The Crimson Tide had no problem with the Wildcats, and it was the Jalen Milroe show pretty much from start. Almost gets a weird injury when he gets kind of speared in the thigh, misses one play. I know, being on injury watch for all the games, I like perked up immediately, and then he was fine and went to go and casually just had 6 touchdowns, total in the game, and had a hand in their entire offense until he was eventually pulled when they were up big. But Alabama wins 49-21, and I think that's a good place to start. What was just your takes being at Kroger, and then especially on Milroe's performance?
I like that at Kroger. It makes it sound like I'm at the
Oh
grocery
yeah,
store, right?
I didn't even do
Yeah,
that on purpose. I'll take it
but
though.
no, I think that obviously Jalen Milroe has just been on another level since the bye week. And he's got 10 touchdowns, more than 600 total yards in those last 2 games. I mean, he's just been amazing, and I think Alabama's offense has just looked totally different. And I think, I think you're seeing a lot more maturity from Jalen Milroe, but they're also doing a lot of things to help him. I don't know if Alabama just forgot that Kendrick Law was on its roster, or like they didn't realize what he was. But man, these last few games, implementing him into the game plan, and they just look like a totally different team. And what Kendrick Law can do in terms of sending him in motion, or just the attention he takes away from the defense. Whether it's on a pop pass or it's just, even that touchdown pass to Amari and Black, Kendrick Law's wheel route was the thing that drew the safety to the perimeter, which opened up the middle of the field for Amari and Black. He's just been, kind of revolutionized Alabama's offense. It's crazy just to think this little sophomore, receiver could be, the difference maker, but he's played a huge role. The line's blocked better. I mean, who would have thought we would have had a no sack performance from Alabama? That's crazy. And
Yeah.
that comes on the heels of a 2-sack performance. So Alabama's finally looking like a title contender, and it's kind of crazy, what a difference an open week can make, because they look like a brand new team. And to be honest with you, I think they look like the second best team in the nation. I know that we'll talk about this later. They're still stuck at 8, but other than Georgia, I don't see another team that really I would stack up against Alabama right now with the way that they're playing the last 2 games.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, the way they got through that, a bit of a gauntlet with LSU and Tennessee in there. But yeah, that you said it. I mean, that was the thing that stood out to me was the offensive line. I mean, they just gave Milroe so much time. Kentucky didn't really, they weren't able to force him to run, especially, when he did pick up that knock a bit, and probably didn't want to do as much running, at least immediately afterward. But he had so much time to just drop back in the pocket and find guys, and looked just completely comfortable. So I agree. I think a lot of credit has to go to the Alabama offensive line. And then I think a lot of credit to these receivers too. I mean, they lost Jermaine Burton to illness. I know this week he's bounced back from that and should be good to go for the Mighty Mocs of Chattanooga. But they lost him due to illness, and I think a lot of these guys made plays. I mean, Kobe Prentice had a couple good catches. He led the way with 74 yards and a touchdown. But I think you have to give some credit to their playmakers as well for filling in when Alabama's go-to guy so far this year, catching at least, was out.
Yeah, believe it or not, Jalen Milroe was not a player of the week from the coaching staff, but the whole entire receiving core was. I don't know how Jalen Milroe misses out on being a player of the week when he becomes the first quarterback or the first player overall to throw for 3 touchdowns and run for 3 touchdowns in the same game. But he wasn't a player of the week from the coaching staff. But the entire receiving core was. Even you talk about the receiving core. Let's just go there. Guys like Malik Benson, who really didn't do anything, offensively, you saw on some of those plays, he'd just make a great block on the perimeter. It's not just about catching for that unit. they really block well on the edge, and that sets up some of like I said, that pop pass to Kendrick Law. I mean, you've got guys like Malik Benson clearing people out of the way. Amari Black, I know he's a tight end, but he kind of lines up as a receiver a lot of times. He's a really great perimeter blocker, and you've got those guys, and you can really make a difference on the edge, whether it's with Milroe, whether it's with an end around or an outside run. So that it's not just getting open and catching the ball and the simple stuff you see on the box score. The receivers really have been stepping up in more ways than one.
Yeah, definitely. I think I feel like you've talked about that a lot with their ability to block and Alabama's ability to get guys out in front beyond the offensive linemen and use some of those short chunk yardage plays because they don't. I mean, Burton's obviously great, when he's in there, but they don't have like a Devonta Smith or someone like that who is like a first round caliber super great weapon that they could throw the ball to all the time. And so it's how can you contribute in some of those short chunk plays or blocking for other guys. I think you're right. That's what makes Alabama, to your point, maybe the second best team in the country right now, is they seem to have guys kind of sacrificing maybe a big stat day for more blocking duties or helping guys out to just keep their offense churning. And it was churning. I mean, let's go back to Jalen Milroe for just a second, because 15 completions, 234 yards, 3 touchdowns. He rushed for 3 touchdowns as well on 36 yards. And the broadcasters, I was listening to this game on TV, and they were talking about maybe not being one of the guys that they bring in as one of the 3 finalists for the Heisman Trophy, but put him back in that conversation, and I think made some good points of like, it's pretty wild to think that he can maybe be thrown in that discussion, given he was literally benched in the 3rd week of the season, and a lot of people weren't sure that he was going to be the guy this year for Alabama, and there's no question about it now. It's pretty impressive to see just how far he's come. I don't think they can be overstated.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of tough for him to climb into that Heisman race in terms of winning it, but you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, the bad thing for him actually is Chattanooga this week. Is he going to be able to have enough playing time to pad his stats to get to the Heisman? I mean, it might be another game where Milroe has 4 touchdowns, but that might come early in the 3rd quarter, and is he going to? I don't know if he's going to have the yardage, and like you said, he's had such a slow start that he's probably not going to get into that Heisman race. But he might be SEC Offensive Player of the Year. He could be in the competition for that. Although it's going to be tough to beat Jaden Daniels for that. On second thought, probably not. Pump the brakes there.
Yeah.
That's probably that'd be my pick for Heisman. I don't like the idea of
My pick too.
If it having to be, I guess, like a title contender for the Heisman. I think Jaden Daniels, we saw what he did. He's my Heisman pick at the moment. But when you look at Milroe, I mean, you can't say enough. And if he continues to, let's say he has, 4 or 5 touchdowns against Chattanooga, 4 or 5 touchdowns against Auburn, and then, goes and puts up big numbers against a great Georgia team. Yeah, you're definitely taking him to New York. I'm even if he doesn't win at that point. I mean, and shoot, I mean, if he just really takes off, I guess there's a small chance. There's not really a Heisman runaway guy. Bo Nix is the leader, but if Oregon loses, is he going to plummet? Jaden Daniels has, multiple losses. JJ McCarthy. I mean, like, are we really that impressed with him? So yeah, there's I guess a small chance. Marvin Harrison's a receiver. It's tough to do. So I mean, like, there's a small chance for Milroe to maybe squeak in if he just goes bananas. But either way, I mean, I think he's set himself up for success in the postseason. He just, for him, it's just all about keeping this momentum and keep on growing.
Definitely. I mean, he's somewhat like, but it's just the fact we can even have that discussion at this point in the year. I don't think that was a place anyone thought that Jalen Milroe would reach with his development this season. But now he's set himself up, just like you said, for next year. He can really explode and be right in that discussion last year. Just as he's already kind of trying to creep into it this season. Jaden Daniels is my pick for Heisman too. It's not a team stat.
So
I know
good.
they have the losses,
So
but he's ridiculously good. He's like, I think between him, Penix, and Bo Nix, it's like he's like triple the rushing yards of Bo Nix. And I think Michael Penix has like negative rushing yards on the season because they count sacks toward it. And Jaden Daniels is just like, he's fourth in the SEC in rushing yards. He's a quarterback. Like it's ridiculous. But Alabama won that game. We're not here
Yeah, I mean,
to
I would say
pledge our
he doesn't play defense, but I mean, shoot, I think if they put Jaden
yeah.
Daniels on defense, they probably have a better chance of stopping teams than what this LSU defense has done. It's not his fault that LSU has one of the worst defenses in the nation. So this is not a Jaden Daniels podcast. This is not an LSU podcast. Yeah. So I guess we'll get back to the scheduled programming.
Yeah. It's a good to have it, but the overarching point, the fact you can even have partially a discussion about Milroe being in that Heisman conversation is, I think, pretty speaks to just what he's done. Let's flip to the other side of the ball, because I think that was an area that I mean, Alabama really impressed. They were good. I gave the grades out this week for Alabama, and I struggled mightily to give any super negative grades other than the one on special teams, which we'll get to. That'll be, I think, the last point of this game. But defense, I mean, the story of this Kentucky game, Alabama holds Ray Davis, Kentucky's talented running back, to 26 yards on 12 carries. He did punch in 2 touchdowns. Both of them were kind of in goal-to-go situations. That was his lowest total rushing yards in a game this season. What did you make of Alabama's defensive performance? I mean, across the board, but especially with stopping Davis.
Yeah, I mean, they stopped Ray Davis without Deontay Lawson, too. Let's not forget. They didn't have him for this game. And they didn't have Jalen Key, who's, a safety, but one of your better run supporting safeties. So that just shows you, the depth of this unit. And I think when you look at both of those positions, Alabama's depth is pretty strong, because you can have a guy like Tresman Marshall step in with Jahad Campbell in the middle of the defense, and obviously you don't lose a step. And then Alabama kind of switched things up a little bit in the secondary differently. Sometimes they brought in Christian Story at safety. Sometimes they moved Malachi Moore back to safety and then put Trey Amos at cornerback, and then moved Terrion Arnold to star. I mean, I think just the fact that Alabama can be so versatile and they can overcome some of those things and still play so well says a lot about Alabama. You got a guy like Malachi Moore. He's not the first round talent that Kool-Aid McKinstry or maybe even Terrion Arnold, now that he's starting to be mentioned in the first round discussion as well. He's not that guy, but for Alabama, he's just as valuable because he's got the experience and he's got the versatility. He's a guy that, doesn't look out of place when you move him back to deep safety, but he's obviously manned that star position so well. I think Alabama's probably got the most talented secondary in the nation. And then when you look at some of the other stuff they can do with the, Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell, and, we already talked about the inside linebackers, and they've got some solid guys, Tim Keenan up front. It's a really solid defense. And I think that's, it's a dependable unit too, that, does this week in and week out. It's not full of streaky players that might show up one week and might not show up the other week. Kentucky had a big run late and it was able to get 21 points, but other than that, it really, the 21 points is a little bit mistelling, because I think Alabama did a little bit better in that game against Kentucky. Even those rushing numbers, I think, wasn't there like a 76-yard run? I mean, if you take that out, the rushing numbers are really, really low for Kentucky. So, just overall a great performance from Alabama on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just look at the stats, like almost all of Alabama's leading tacklers, were guys in the secondary making those plays. And the fact they can do it, like Turner and Braswell both had pretty quiet games, and they can afford to do that with just how deep this backer core and this defensive line is, like you mentioned. Caleb Downs is going to be a guy who's just going to be great for this program going forward. I mean, to come in as a freshman and just be so good, and just shut it down and be a good tackler as well. Like I think he's just going to have a huge future. I don't think that's a super hot take or obvious. It's pretty obvious thing to say, but yeah, I think you make some good points here on defense. You did mention Kool-Aid McKinstry, and he is a first round talent in the secondary. He kind of drew in the headlines because, just like Saban, when he talked about that 76-yard run, in a game like this, when everything goes as close to perfect as it really can on both sides of the ball, a few people even got hurt in this game for Alabama, which was good to see as well. You start to hyper focus on some of the mistakes, and Kool-Aid obviously had that muffed punt when Alabama was up 21-0. Really, it looked like it was just going to shut the game down, midway through the first quarter. Had they had, he had fielded it and they marched down the field to score another touchdown, go up 28-0. I mean, game's over at that point. But he muffs it. Kentucky marches back down, gets 7. It was a big talking point. Saban afterward defending Kool-Aid and kind of gave some critique of Alabama's gunners, saying they, sometimes there's weird punts. You have to make sure to get out of his way. What did you make of all that? And I know, I believe, from what I've read from you, like you kind of take it more that Kool-Aid maybe needs to be taken off punts and just kind of, Alabama maybe needs to go to a different direction there, or in a different direction.
For my own opinion, yeah, it just makes too much sense to take him off of punts. And it's not necessarily because I don't think he can do the job, but your risk reward here is just not paying off. Even if he was doing as well as he was last year, which was probably the best punt returner in the nation, he's still maybe your most talented defender, him or Dallas Turner, and putting him in a position where he can take big hits and get injuries. I mean, just look at what happened. I know it was a while ago, but Eddie Jackson, injures himself for the season and suffers an injury that might have cost Alabama a title in 2016. I think when you look at Kool-Aid McKinstry, if he's not getting the job done and he's struggling at all, Alabama has other people that are willing or that are capable of stepping up and doing that role productively. People that if you were to lose them, I think wouldn't be as tragic as if you lost Kool-Aid McKinstry. I mean, obviously Alabama doesn't want to lose Isaiah Bond, but they've got more people to replace Isaiah Bond than they do Kool-Aid McKinstry, or Kendrick Law is another person that's been doing really well lately. I mean, look, we saw what he's been doing with the ball in open spaces. You're telling me that, if for some reason something's in Kool-Aid McKinstry's head that Kendrick Law can't make these plays. I mean, look at what he's been doing on the offensive side of the ball. So Nick Saban probably doesn't want to change. He probably doesn't want to do anything to, upset the balance. I don't think he's worried about necessarily upsetting a player in terms of Kool-Aid McKinstry, but at the same time, do you want to take a shot at his confidence by taking him off a roll? Will that seep into defense? I mean, these are all kind of things that you consider, I guess, as a head coach. But if you asked me, it certainly seems like it's time for a change. You can say the weird punts, you can say the gunners. If the gunner ran into Kool-Aid McKinstry, it was slight because you didn't see him, really shook or moved on that punt. Regardless, even if he did get knocked into his own guy, you got to make that catch, and so it's not just that one time either. So I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is a good punt returner. I think, he could be one in the next level too. It's just a matter of his confidence isn't right there and the risk reward's not there either for Alabama. So I personally would make a change. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. His average, return yards per punter are down. He's had the muff. I think he's had a couple this year. Like I agree. I don't really see why you don't just go to, maybe more of a fringe player on that who's just really speedy and can maybe make a difference. I feel like that's becoming more mainstream now, where you have someone who's like, he's a backup on offense or defense, but that's his main role is punt returns. Cause yeah, you just don't want to, those are the most dangerous plays on the field as a special teams, and you don't want to get your guy hurt mainly. But I agree. I don't think he should probably stay on it, but I also agree with what you said, where I almost think it's too late now with, Chattanooga and then Auburn, and then you're in the SEC championship. I think there is probably a mojo thing there, a flow thing there where, you make a big change at that. Does it become worse? Does that put more pressure on the new guy to be a lot better? And then, they have to go back to Kool-Aid McKinstry, and that becomes just a whole fiasco. So, Saban's been through things like this a lot in his long career, and I think he probably has the right read on it. But it is tough to see as or for the fan perspective, like, the guy's muffing punts. It seems natural to just make a switch there, but we'll see. I think against Chattanooga, which we'll get into briefly, because I'm not going to make you give a scouting report on the mocks. As much as it would be fun
I wouldn't really have one.
As much as it would be fun to put you on the spot, they do have a UCLA transfer at quarterback. Did he play in more than 2 games? No, but he's 9th in the FCS in passing yards, so everyone watch out. But getting into that, I mean, who are some guys, maybe on the younger side of things? Like, and I wanted to ask Brandon about this as well from his recruiting standpoint. Some of the guys maybe they brought in. Who's someone you'd maybe like to see that's kind of on the fringes of the roster, not even the roster, but just of getting a lot of playing time right now, maybe a little bit younger, that you could see, getting a lot of game action here against Chattanooga, assuming the Mocs don't do something very special inside Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday.
Selfishly, and
Extraordinary, I won't call it.
Anyone that follows my 3-2-1 will know my troubles and struggles with my bold predictions this year. I'm 4-6. I could still go for that. I could still get that 6-6 record that I'm.
That's like in the hunt if you're talking NFL.
Yeah, I mean that's there. I'd be bowl eligible in college, but this week I projected that one of Justice Haynes or Richard Young, the two true freshman running backs, would score their first touchdown. So just selfishly, for my own sake, and to keep that 6-6 possibility alive, I'd like to see them maybe bust out and have a good game. And both of those guys have looked good in their limited carries and limited opportunities. I would think that Alabama is going to blow out Chattanooga. I mean, if they come ready, I don't know if they're setting up mouse traps for this game the way that they did for Kentucky, but I think that it's going to be a challenge to come out. But if they do, they should have no trouble blowing by Chattanooga. And if that's the case, you might look in that fourth quarter, they're just trying to run out the score. That might give an opportunity for someone like Justice Haynes or Richard Young to really get those opportunities that they hadn't really gotten earlier. So that's kind of who I'm going with on the offensive side of the ball. On defense, there's some guys, that we didn't ask about Devontae Smith. I wonder if this is a game where you could maybe work him in if he's ready. I'd have to really kind of go and ask some people if he's somebody that could you kind of like slip him in and give Auburn something to think about in the secondary. A guy like Jake Pope, though, is a safety that doesn't get a lot of playing time just because of Alabama's depth back there. Maybe he's a young guy that could maybe make a difference. I'm not sure if we're going to see Alabama's pass rushers, Keon Keeley or Yanzi Pierre. We haven't really seen them this season. Maybe they get a brief playing time just to get them on the field. I'm sure the fans would love to see those two 5-star guys get an opportunity. We'll have to see. So there's different guys around that you'll definitely get to see. I think it's just all a matter of that. That's the important part about everyone playing well. If the starters come out sharp and take care of business, they can leave the field earlier. It opens up time for the younger guys, and this is an important game for those younger guys. So I'm sure all those guys want opportunities. So it's almost like the starters' jobs to do well, to give their younger teammates a chance at probably their final chance of the season at extended reps.
Yeah, definitely. I like what you said with the running backs, because I think they've showed off that depth to some extent. I think that does give a good opportunity for some of those younger guys, maybe to show out. You maybe give them the start, give them a little bit more carries, just let them get their feet wet. I know it's an FCS opponent, but college football is college football, and that's what theoretically that's what these games are for. I know Nick Saban will be the last person to tell you that. I think he brought up it was like 3-0 the last time they played Chattanooga, like midway through the second quarter. So certainly Alabama don't want any part of that here this time around. But yeah, I like your takes there. I was looking also, just because you said you want to go 6-6. Would you rather be in the Gasparilla Bowl or the Quick Lane Bowl for picks if you had to pick one of them? That's where
Gasparilla is in like Tampa,
in Tampa.
Right? Where's Quick Lane?
Let me look. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Tampa's
I was looking up a
Tampa, I know the Bahamas Bowl is not in the Bahamas anymore, which is disappointing.
Yeah, the Quick Lane Bowl is at Ford Field in Detroit. So.
Oh yeah, so we're definitely taking Gasparilla there.
I can tell you
to go to Detroit in the middle of the winter. That's I might just decline my bowl opportunity. Maybe it's better to go 5-7.
Put JMU in there, decline it, and get JMU in there. I will say, I know the Gasparilla Bowl, the conditions at game time for that game, it was like 54 degrees that night in Tampa. So people were disappointed. But yeah, anyway, that aside, I think you make some good points with who we might see. It is Cupcake Week again. I think you had joked, that's the last question you ever want to get asked. You ever want to ask Nick Saban if you're a media member, just because
I've made
he
that
obviously,
mistake
especially
too.
with this
So
team. Yeah, you only learn from experience. I mean, everyone's got to have their moments. But yeah, especially for this season, Saban's team, like taking it one game at a time. And we mentioned taking one game at a time. That's what Alabama just needs to do and keep winning to try and stay in this college football playoff conversation. Tony, I want to touch on that last before we segue and talk some basketball, because the Crimson Tide stayed number 8 here in the college football playoff behind Tennessee and Oregon once again. I know when we talked about this last week, you had mentioned, it had been the committee kind of making the mistake when they started these rankings, putting Oregon ahead of Alabama in the first place. But keeping Alabama at 8. We know they're playing Georgia now in the SEC championship. The Bulldogs now number 1. They leapfrogged Ohio State after Georgia crushed Ole Miss last Saturday night. But what are your thoughts on the college football playoff rankings? I know you wrote an article about it, but maybe debrief like stuff that needs to happen for Alabama to get where it needs to be, other than obviously getting a win over the Dogs in the championship game.
First of all, Alabama's got to win the remainder of their games. That's a given. You're not going to have a 2-loss team in the playoff unless some crazy things happen, and it won't be Alabama if there is. So, other than that, I feel like send a care package to Oregon State, because the Beavers play Oregon and Washington. I mean, technically, Oregon State can do Alabama's job for it. Wins in both those games would pretty much knock out the Pac-12 out of the playoff and really give Alabama full control of its destiny. There's a thought that Alabama will still control its own destiny. I mean, I think with Georgia moving to number 1, there's some people, and I can see where it's thought that Alabama can win that game and win out, and that final win over Georgia will be enough to boost Alabama over, maybe an Oregon or a Texas. If the committee did what it was supposed to do, it should have moved Alabama over Texas this week. When you look at Texas, they barely squeaked by against a TCU. They lose a starter. And I know that they got Quinn Ewers back. And you can talk about how they're a stronger team, but they lost their starting running back, 1,000-yard rusher, and you barely squeaked by. Those are two things that the committee says should matter. So obviously the committee had them well above Alabama, because if it was close at all, you would think that those two factors would then allow Alabama, especially with the way Alabama is playing, to move ahead of Texas. That would have been a sneaky move that the committee could have done to kind of get rid of that head-to-head, which I think at the end, when you look at it and when you look at the full resume, this is kind of the point I was making last podcast, was the committee did itself a disservice by putting Alabama back so far, because at the end of it, Alabama is going to have the best resume if they win out. And it's going to create some tough situations where, I think I said before that I view Alabama as the second best team behind Georgia. Well, if Alabama beats Georgia, and then I guess you're going to have to knock Georgia out, then you run the risk of not having what I think is your two best teams in the playoffs. You could have both of them left out if you don't take an Alabama and you don't take a Georgia. So, I think that there could be some magic, like a lot of people do. If Alabama beats Georgia, there might be some reconfiguring, but it's going to be tough if, you have an Oregon team that's 2 spots ahead of Alabama heading into the final week and they beat Washington. Let's just say Washington's still undefeated. How are you going to punish them behind and have Alabama jump them after they beat Washington? That could create some difficult things if Texas doesn't, lose. That will obviously create a difficult situation for Alabama as well. So I wrote a story about Alabama's biggest allies in the college football playoff chase, if you will. It obviously Oregon State's number 1. Iowa State plays Texas this week in a game where, Iowa State's helped out Alabama in the past, beating Oklahoma State. to send Alabama to the 2000 and what is it 12 championship game, or is it the BCS championship game? I think somebody like Florida. Look, I don't know how good Florida State is. I don't know how good they're playing. That game's in the Swamp. Perhaps a Florida team with Billy Napier. Florida plays Missouri this week. They're probably going to lose. You're going to be 5-6 going into a game against Florida State. Billy Napier's job might be in the hot seat. I think that might be a game that they just really need to win, So that could be a game that could be sneaky. And then you've got guys like I put Louisville in there. I mean, a Louisville could beat Florida State in the championship game. You just never know. So there are a few things to follow, and I still find it hard to believe that there's going to be no chaos, but it is, from an Alabama perspective, a little bit kind of each week where there's not any movement gets a little bit nerve-wracking for Alabama fans. And so there's going to be some anxious scoreboard watching, especially this week, where you don't really have the distraction of another game, because I don't think really anybody's focused on this Chattanooga game. Sorry, Nick Saban. I think most people are worried about what's going on across college football than what's actually going to be happening in Bryant-Denny Stadium.
They probably doubled the rat traps for, they were like, don't eat the rat poison, that this game's a cupcake game, that for the Alabama's players. But
it'd be really funny if they put cupcakes across the
there you go. But like the cupcakes, it's like
Alabama. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like mayo instead of frosting, where it's like, oh, you ate the cupcake because it's cupcake week, but it's actually bad. You do that. Or the dough is made out of, like, I don't know, it's like moldy or something. Expired not dough, whatever, cupcake mix. I don't know. I can't bake anything. But yeah, it's very tricky, because it's like every week you're waiting for something to happen, and then that something doesn't really happen. And it feels like it should. It feels like every year in the college football playoff, it ends up kind of sorting it out. There's almost always like one team that's angry, but to broaden it out, I mean, Alabama might not be the only team that's upset about where they finish out if nothing crazy happens. There's going to be a couple teams there that'll be pretty frustrated. And it's an unfortunate, for Crimson Tide fans, example of, I think, why this expansion is going to be great with these home games, and you're going to have all the teams right up there that deserve to be included put in, because obviously if it was a 12-team format, Alabama would have no issues. But there's still, I think, definitely you just keep winning out. You beat Georgia. I do think that's good enough. It does make like you said, it difficult to be like, well, do we want to still have Georgia because they're still really good, but they didn't win their conference? It's a whole mess.
I think if you had like an eye test, like this is Tony Tsoukalas's eye test playoff, it'd be Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, and Texas. Maybe Texas, then Oregon.
Those are the either the Big Ten
I actually feel like could be competitive against each other in a playoff. I don't think either of the Big Ten teams are any good. I don't think Florida State's any good. I think if they get into there's a good chance that both of those teams will get into the playoff, and I think they're just going to get destroyed when they do, unless they play each other, which could also happen. And then the winner of that game will get destroyed by either Georgia or Alabama. The good thing for Alabama's sake is it's looking, I know Georgia fans probably feel like they could get in with the loss in the SEC championship game as long as it was close. I just don't see that. I think, especially with Georgia's strength of schedule, I don't necessarily, it got a little bit better with the Missouri win that helped Georgia. But I don't see how they get in with a loss to Alabama and no conference championship. So, I mean, if Alabama gets in and doesn't have to play Georgia in the playoff, I think I'd favor them over everybody. So, I mean, that's the positive is, you get to kind of, I think Alabama has a chance of entering the playoff as the favorite, which is kind of crazy when we talked about, who would have thought earlier in the season about Jalen Milroe, who would have thought that about Alabama, is that they could be entering, if they do make the playoff, and they still have to, make it, but they could be the favorite heading into it, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I remember making jokes. We're talking about the Gasparilla Bowl. I remember making jokes that Alabama would be back in the Gasparilla Bowl after that, awful performance against South Florida. So it's been a crazy ride this season. And I just think, kind of touching on what you said before, is just got to take it one game at a time. if Alabama gets its business done, chances are it'll be in a good position to at least campaign for that final spot. So we'll just kind of have to see what happens.
Got to take care of the mocks. Got to take care of the mocks on Saturday. That's where it all starts.
Terrell Owens is
I think,
mocks.
yeah, yeah, Terrell Owens is mocks. They're what, 44.5-point favorites? Think they cover?
I don't know. Maybe probably not. I haven't made my prediction. I'm gonna have to make it for Saturday. I'm gonna say no, just because there is a chance that Alabama sleepwalks through this game. It won't be because Alabama can't put up. I mean, Alabama could beat UTC by 70 if it wants to, but I'm not sure it's going to. I think there's a couple factors that might end up with Alabama covering. If you think about it, if they're really trying to make a statement or a push or any kind of thing for Jalen Milroe, I think they might want to get him going and might dial up some plays. But at the same hand, how much of this offense do you want to give away right before you play a tough game against Auburn, who this is going to be their Super Bowl, is going to be beating Alabama in the Iron Bowl. And then you also have Georgia the next week. You probably just want to get out of this game without an injury. So 44 points, 44.5 points, whatever it is. Like most of the betting services aren't even like dealing with this game. I think I have to go to like FanDuel to find the 44.5 point favorite. But I don't know. I guess I'll probably end up taking Chattanooga with the mountain of points.
I think Alabama's going to cover. I think they might do exactly what you said and just blow the doors off of Chattanooga and roll into Auburn on even more of a high than it already was. But yeah, it's a cupcake week in the SEC. Alabama. We'll see who plays. We'll see how Milroe does. See if he can make a Heisman statement here on Saturday. With that, we'll segue. We're going to talk some men's hoops to close out the show. Crimson Tide basketball rolling. Have not gone under 100 points yet, so stay tuned for that. We'll finish the show with some men's basketball. Okay, yeah, we're going to segue. We're going to talk some Alabama men's basketball. Crimson Tide have rolled. They've scored 100 or more points, a lot in all three, in fact, of their first three games of the season. Now face Mercer on Friday with a chance to go 4 for 4, which they did the last time. I think every Alabama media outlet has loved posting this stat. I believe it's the 1956-57 season was the last time this happened, where they won their first 4 games, scoring 100 or more points. So that's been kind of a fun stat, but this has been a very, very fun team to watch. We know how fun last season's team was. And Tony, like just before you and I hopped on the air, we feel this team just might be, and it's going to be determined really next week when they go to this Emerald Coast Classic in Destin. That's where it's going to really be, I think, a good measuring stick of where this team is. But I think we kind of feel this team maybe is better than the number 22 ranking that it has right now.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to tell because I don't think the competition that Alabama's played. I mean, Indiana State might be pretty decent, and we'll see how Morehead State is. I don't think South Alabama is a good team at all. I don't think they're going to be a good team. But we'll see because they haven't played top-notch competition quite yet. But I mean, Alabama's been doing really well. They can be a really, really good offensive team. They're not going to be shooting 50% from 3 the whole season like they have their first 3 games, or if they do, they'll go undefeated. But I think that from Alabama's perspective, I think this is going to be a really good offensive team that if it can just show up enough on defense, it's going to be really tough to beat. I think that they're going to have to play better defense against better teams, and we really haven't seen Alabama play the defense it needs to play, even against South Alabama. Nate Oats said it. They did well, and they held, I think South Alabama to, I forget what it was, but almost like 20-something% shooting on the night, maybe low 30s. But a lot of that was like missed shots from South Alabama. And I think, better teams are going to be able to hit those. Alabama still needs to improve on its defense. But, I think that I think this offense could be just really good. It's going to be a really fun team to watch. And so, yeah, I do think it's better than 22 overall. I think probably Alabama's probably closer in the teens somewhere in terms of where they stand in the nation. But, maybe they're even higher than that. Maybe we'll see. I mean, they've got one of the best offenses in the nation. So they can score with anyone. When they're hot, they're pretty unbeatable.
Yeah, currently third in the country in adjusted offensive efficiency per Mr. Ken Pomeroy. But yeah, I think you're right, and I think this team is is on the right track right now. Where obviously it may be sometimes better if your defense is a little further along in your offense, because I think that's a harder part of college basketball, is to be a really good defensive team. And yeah, this team is not there yet, or at least not to where Nate Oats wants it to be yet by his high standards. And that's what has helped Alabama be so good. But I think they're on the right track, and they did. And a lot of individuals did some good things. I think against South Alabama, and you and I were kind of talking. I wrote a little bit about Nick Pringle, who Oates challenged this past week. He said he wanted to see more from him, and then in 18 minutes he went out and had 12 points and 7 rebounds. And yes, it of course has the asterisk, the caveat on it. It's the South Alabama Jaguars. This team isn't good, but I think that's a situation where at this point in the season, when you can tell they're trying to get better at defense, figure things out, get more comfortable, and Pringle in particular trying to get more comfortable with his role. I think that's a game that can do wonders for your confidence as you kind of head forward. He maybe has another good game against Mercer, and then kind of hits a stride from there. But I think you can't take away from some of the individual performers in this game, or in this game so far early this season. Muhammad Wagi's been great. He had 10 points and 7 rebounds off the bench. That's something, I don't know if you want to touch on that or even just any more specifics of Alabama's offense, but I think that's something where you're going to see Nick Pringle be that maybe starting 5, and then he's kind of the first one subbed, and Wagi comes in, and they just go back and forth rim running and protecting the basket. Kind of doing the effort that Charles Bediako did last year collaboratively, on both ends of the floor. But I don't know if you had any more particulars from South
Yeah.
Alabama.
I mean, like, I talked with Nate Oats. I asked him a question that probably would have got me killed if I asked it to Nick Saban. But basically, this Mercer game coming up is kind of the last audition before things get serious at the Emerald Coast Classic. It's the last really time for Alabama to kind of figure out its rotation, and so this is going to be a good opportunity to kind of see where things stand for Alabama and kind of what that rotation will be. Nate Oats, said that obviously Mark Sears, Aaron Estrada, and Grant Nelson have kind of separated themselves, and they're kind of like the untouchables. They're going to remain starters. They're going to, I mean, they're definitely, I don't think you needed Nate Oats to tell you that they're going to be in the rotation, but they are. And I think after that, you look at the 2 other guys that have started every game, and Rylan Griffin and Nick Pringle. And I think you also have Mo Wagi, Latrell Wrightsell, and Jaron Stevenson. And so that's like your 8. And then after that, I think, there might be a space for another guy in the rotation, but it's not going to get that deep. So is it Sam Walters? Is it Davin Cosby? Is it Mo Diabate? Like one of those guys, Chris Parker, I think, is going to redshirt. So it's really just 11 guys, right? So one of those last 3, this is kind of an audition game. Is Devin Cosby going to, push Latrell Wrightsell for minutes? They came up today, but really, I mean, that might be a competition. Or is he going to, does he play good enough defense where Alabama can go smaller and put him in a rotation, maybe where Rylan Griffin can go, or the Sam Walters show that he can, push Jaron Stevenson for minutes as a 4. He's a great shooter. He can do that. Mo Diabate is another guy that, really strong kind of defensive guy. Does he play well enough to get a big role? I think that's something that you're going to look at this Mercer game. And Nate Oats said that, if all 11 players are playing super well, that, I mean, they might all play. It's not like he's going to just decide not to play someone. But I think when you start getting into the Ohio State or Oregon or Santa Clara, you're going to have to kind of make those decisions of who plays. And I think you kind of use this game as one final look to kind of, before you make that, what I think might be an 8 or 9 man rotation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you brought up Latrell Wrightsell, because I really liked his performance just against South Alabama. He had those 3 steals. He only had 6 points, but he seems to be embracing that kind of blue collar basketball that Nate Oats has been, putting out here in his tenure at Alabama. But yeah, I mean, I think it's another tune-up game. It's a question of how complete of a performance can you have. I mean, Oates said he thought this game against South Alabama was probably the best that they've had of the 3 that they played. So it's about how can you improve off of that, because it's only going to get harder from there, like you said. And yeah, it'll be an interesting question to see, who kind of takes those minutes, whether, maybe they go with Wagi in the starting lineup if they like what they've seen more from him over not Parker, Pringle. Um, but it seems like they're giving Nick a chance, given that he's a returner and stuff. I do think Walters will probably eventually be slashed out of the lineup just because he's young, and I think his minutes will just naturally tick down. But he had a great game. So they're not making it easy on Oats, which is I guess a good thing, to have kind of that inter squad competition. I think that's a good thing too. Like it's guys competing with each other, not just against another team for, they're competing for minutes and competing for, a spot on the floor when it comes to SEC play. Mercer, only thing I have on them, they do have a common opponent with Alabama. They've both played Morehead State. Mercer lost. So that can kind of give you an insight as to maybe where the Bears stand as far as how this game will go. Yeah, it might be a rough one on Friday evening.
Yeah.
People
might be back-to-back rough ones for Alabama's opponents Friday and Saturday. Yeah.
Is it a cupcake week for both teams? Is that how that?
I should have asked Nate. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. You need to get Nate's. You need to get the real take about how Alabama football is feeling about Chattanooga from Nate Oats. He'll be more upfront with you about it.
That probably would. Nate's problem is he probably says too much. So
yeah. He gave a lot of compliments to the football team. I know he was asked like the other media day, like how you balance that in the early season, with football still going on at Alabama. But yeah, anything final in terms of like what you saw against South, or just any of these players heading into Mercer? I think
it's pretty good. I mean, the offense is just there. It's not sustainable. I don't think Alabama's going to shoot as well. And Nate Oats said that today. It's just they're not going to shoot as well as they have these first 3 games. But I still think, with that said, I still think this offense is going to be one of the best offenses in the nation. And they can do. We have so many people that can do so many things. You saw Grant Nelson, contribute against South. He didn't really score a lot of points this time, but he still contributes another way. He can get assists. He can get rebounds. He's kind of that new age big that can do everything. So yeah, I think that this is going to be a really fun team to watch.
You'd way rather on offense be regressing to the mean than be starting like, this is probably how I'd expect we'd be playing offense by SEC play. You'd rather be having them blow the doors off of teams and then slowly come back down to where, okay, this is just a really good offense for, the SEC right now. You'd rather have them be at an unsustainable level than underperforming in that area. But we'll see. I think defense is a thing to watch. I think you touched on that in your how to watch. So everyone go check that out. But yeah, 7:00 in Coleman, SEC Network Plus for everyone watching at home. They hopefully won't be on SEC Network Plus for very long. Although I have to shout out Richard Hoover and I think it's Richard Hendricks, the commentary team. They do a good job. I've been watching the games at home. I gotta give those guys a shout out.
You can just keep on streaming SEC Plus too, because the football game's not going to be on regular television. I know the Alabama fans are super happy about that. So yeah. I hope you have streaming capabilities this weekend, because both of Alabama's games are stream only.
It's gonna get better, guys. Well, if Georgia will be mainstream television, and then basketball will have some more fun games coming up. It's gonna be a great non-con for sure. But yeah, Mercer and Chattanooga are in the Crimson Tide's way this week. We'll see if Alabama has any problems, but I don't think we're expecting either program to struggle too much. For that, I think we're gonna end things off. We'll come back next week. Hopefully, have Brandon and Jordan back on to recap some more. We'll preview basketball in the Emerald Coast Classic, and then it's Iron Bowl week. So should be some fun stuff to talk about. It's a weird Auburn team. Only 4 losses, even though they have Peyton Thorne at quarterback. Weird.
Yeah,
strange to me. But
it's gonna be a crazy game in Auburn. It always is. So
always is.
To see. Yeah.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back next week. But for us at Tide Illustrated, enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the weekend of games, and hopefully you're able to stream them. But with that, we'll be back next week. See you guys.